Montgomery County Council meeting. We're going to begin with a point of personal privilege, and I'm going to ask Vice President Hucker if he's there. I can't see Vice President Hucker. Vice President Hucker, are you here? Is Vice President Hucker, are you with us? Well, what we're going to do is we'll wait for, we'll do, Vice President, I have a feeling this is not Vice President Hucker. Yes, go ahead. Okay. So while we're waiting for Vice President Hucker, Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements or changes in our consent, in our calendar?
Good morning. We do not have any announcements or any petitions, but we do have some changes to our agenda today. We have an addendum, and I will go through those. We have a number of deferred items. The work session FY21 operating budget, items 1 and 2, compensation and benefits for all agencies, and 2, FY20 operating budget savings plan, retiree health benefits trust. Those items, that work session for those items will be rescheduled at a later date. We've also deferred item 3A, work session, resolution to indicate the council's intent to approve or reject provisions of the collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35. That work session will be rescheduled at a later date. Deferred 3B, work session, resolution to indicate the council's intent to approve or reject provisions of the collective bargaining agreement with the Municipal and County Government Employees Organization, Local 1994. That work session will be rescheduled at a later date. Deferred item 3C, work session, resolution to indicate the council's intent to approve or reject provisions of the collective bargaining agreement with the Montgomery County Career Firefighters Association of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 1664. That work session will be rescheduled at a later date. Deferred also is item 3D, work session, resolution to indicate the council's intent to approve or reject provisions of the collective bargaining agreement with Montgomery County. The work session will be rescheduled at a later date. That is all, Mr. President.
Thank you. And the last one was with Montgomery County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And I just as an aside, I did want to explain that the unions have approached us to discuss how we can best respond to this unprecedented crisis. They have agreed to meet with the county executive and me as the council president to discuss the contracts in light of the current crisis. So that's why we're having the deferrals. And with that is Council Vice President Hucker on the call. Council Vice President Hucker?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here. I was muted temporarily. Are we ready for the, thank you for your leadership on reaching this temporary resolution with the public employee unions. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do in light of the crisis, and it's great that they'll go back and take a second look at those contracts. Are we ready for the hero recognition?
We are ready for your hero recognition, please.
Thank you. Well, it's certainly coming from all of us, I believe. It's my pleasure and honor today to recognize a respected and distinguished and caring leader for the community, Reverend Pat Drumming from the Rainbow Family Christian Church in Silver Spring. I have worked with, and there may be a picture of Reverend Pat that'll be shared with us soon. I've worked with Reverend Pat for years, and I can attest to her commitment to Montgomery County and her absolute indefatigable commitment to serving our most vulnerable residents. Reverend Drumming was one of the first individuals to spring into action when the COVID-19 emergency hit Montgomery County. And I communicated that we were all ready to help her in any way we could. Under her leadership, the Rainbow Community Development Center had been established with her husband to help meet the needs of our community. The Community Development Center has been really a crucial resource for families who need to put food on their table and are facing food insecurity. From March 15th to April 19th, Rainbow has provided groceries to 633 households in the White Oak area. 298 of those were seniors. That translates to 2,600 and 86 people, 1,484 adults, and 1,200 children. Prior to COVID-19, an average Rainbow household served 65 to 70 households per week. And since the crisis began, Rainbow has been averaging 70 households per distribution day every single week since the crisis began. Each household has received an average of 10 bags of groceries per visit. That includes fresh meat, produce, non-perishable shelf food items like canned vegetables and pastas and sauces and dairy items. And each delivery lasts from 7 to 10 days. They really have this figured out. They have their logistics down after years of providing emergency food relief and Thanksgiving dinners and many other things for the community. They are not only a resource to families in need, but to all other organizations as well. They've shared over 65,000 pounds of food with other hunger-fighting organizations in Montgomery County. And under Reverend Drumming's leadership, Rainbow serves on the Montgomery County Food Security Task Force. So I can't stress enough how much of a resource Reverend Drumming and the church are to Montgomery County, especially during this global pandemic, and that disproportionately affects our most vulnerable residents. So I really want to congratulate Reverend Pat Drumming for her commitment to our county and her hard work. She's very deserving of the hero recognition and much, much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President. I did want to mention as we move through our agenda, which obviously the first parts are all deferred, that we really do want to thank the unions who are working with us, the county executive, obviously, who's working with us, and a special thanks to Councilmember Nancy Navarro as the chair of government operations, who was instrumental in this as well. So we're all working together, and we do sincerely appreciate everyone's efforts as we go through this unbelievable events that we're all going through. And with that, I would like to move on to, I guess it's actually item number 4 on our agenda, a work session on FY21 through 26 capital improvements program. And it's the general government economic development projects. And it would be Councilmember Reamer, if you have some comments on it, please.
Thank you, Council President. I think just given the technical element of a lot of this, I will turn it to Jean to walk us through. But I did want to say there's one provision in here that I'm particularly happy to see relating to an item that was not reviewed by the Fed committee, and that's the additional funding for the life sciences and technology centers for some incubator space at the Germantown Montgomery College campus, expanding some of the wet lab space there, because there's really a shortage of small wet lab space in Montgomery County where smaller startups and scientists can get going. And so this had been identified as a priority need, and I think it's a good recommendation to add that. So I think I'll ask Jean to kind of walk us through, but there wasn't particularly anything of great controversy here, as I recall. So maybe Jean could take us through the packet.
Very good. Good morning, council members.
Good morning.
So we can move through this rather quickly. As noted in the packet, there's 2 kind of consent items that the Fed committee already reviewed, the Marriott International Headquarters and Hotel Project and the White Flint Redevelopment Program. Both of those projects were recommended for approval by the Fed committee as recommended by the executive. I'll pause there to let the council, if they have any questions about those 2 projects before I move on.
Can you just give us the plain language explanation of that, Jean?
Of those 2 projects?
Yeah.
Sure. So the Marriott International Headquarters and Hotel Project is the agreement that the county entered into 4 years ago to see the expansion of Marriott in Bethesda. So it supports that project. It has $11 million remaining in the CIP, and that's what the Fed committee approved, $5.5 million in 21 and $5.5 million in 22.
So this is the disbursement of the incentive previously approved.
That is correct.
Thank you.
So, and then the White Flint redevelopment program supports staff work related to the groundwork in White Flint. So other projects, transportation projects, are in a separate project description forms. This is kind of an umbrella project that supports all of those efforts in White Flint. The county executive removed extra finance staff from that, given their work. That had kind of retains is a little bit of staff work related to the coordinator position in the future years.
Okay.
So if we don't have any questions about those, can we just assume those two are going to move on as approved by the Fed committee?
Well, if council members have any questions about them, they'll ask, but I think we can continue through. Yeah.
Okay. The next project was the White Oak redevelopment program. The Fed committee did.
Let me just pause you for a moment. We have a procedure here where we text the council president when someone wants to speak. So I think we'll continue to do that. So even though I'm leading the briefing on this packet, if you want to speak, just text.
Right, there's going to be no change from that. Thank you, council member, but there's no change from that. If anyone wants to speak, please text me. And at this moment, I have no text. So, Gene, if we do get one, we will interrupt you. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so the next one is the White Oak redevelopment program. The Fed committee did review this, but requested the executive move the coordinator position that was a 0.5 FTE out into the operating budget. The executive chose to do that. It was a current revenue issue, so it was no change to the operating budget. So that 0.5 FTE has now been moved into the Office of the County Executive. That is the only change since the Fed committee reviewed this in February. The White Oak redevelopment program also continues to contain the $40 million for the county's portion of the master plan roads out in White Oak. Other than that, there have been no changes. So the Fed committee ultimately got what it requested, and so council staff believes that this should be approved as amended by the executive.
Okay, I would like to make a comment on this item around the White Oak redevelopment. This is a related issue. There was quite a discussion about the redevelopment of the old Silver Spring Library site, and the housing strategy that was finally recommended by the county executive for that project was to support an early education center in the old Silver Spring Library site and housing in the White Oak site. And so the agreement was that the developer of Viva White Oak, which the family is also the funder of the early education center, so they're both related, would provide a pad site to Victory Housing. The problem is that the developer has not moved forward, and Victory Housing has a requirement to finalize an agreement with the developer by the end of this calendar year, and the developer is not surely going to move forward by the end of this calendar year. And if the developer doesn't move forward, there's no pad site provided or determined, and then the expiration, the agreement to provide the affordable housing expires. So this is a problem that I would like to alert the executive branch to and ask them to get to work on this, please, because I think it was important that we provide affordable housing when we disposed of the county land on this old library, of the old Silver Spring Library site. And it was not a particularly great agreement in my opinion, but it is what it is. But if the housing in White Oak is not delivered, that would be really a major problem. So we'll just bottom line, that can't happen. We cannot allow that to happen. So I just want to ask DGS, Greg Assant, to please be in touch with Victory Housing. Let's make sure that this is all taken care of. Thanks. And this is related to the CIP item, because the CIP item for the White Oak is all the money that the county will spend preparing the site when it's time to move forward.
Mary Beck would like to speak on this topic, please.
Yes, I wasn't sure if Greg was here, but we will make sure that we follow up on those concerns from Mr. Reamer.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And Councilmember Navarro, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councilmember Reamer, for highlighting that issue. I just want to generally observe that, we've been waiting quite a while for something to happen in that particular site. We worked so hard to get to this point of finally approving this, master plan and working to ensure that there was this, general development agreement. And there's not one meeting that I go to in my area of the county where somebody doesn't ask me what's happening with the Vigo White Oak redevelopment. And although a couple of things have occurred, it is not near what we all worked so hard to position. And I think that especially now in light of this pandemic, and we don't know what post-COVID-19 is going to look like, I just think that we as on the council working, with the administration need to have some conversations about rethinking and perhaps reimagining what can happen there. It is absolutely tied to many of the disparities that we have, been so aware of for so long in the East County, and we cannot afford to just let this linger more and more and more. It seems like every time you turn around, there's one other obstacle and another reason why things can't move forward. It is unacceptable. So I just really want to go on record saying that we need to figure something out. We need to revisit. This is a very important component for economic development, but also for future job sources, opportunities in a part of the county that has just been neglected for a very long time. This was supposed to be one of those major initiatives to address that. So again, thank you to the Fed committee for their work, but we need to do a lot more, I think, very quickly to reimagine what can occur in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. I did just receive a text from David Dice from GGS, and he said to let everyone know that they are in contact with Victory and the Godowskis, and they will certainly follow up. So with that, Ms. Jean,
Okay.
if you can continue, please.
Thanks.
Very good. So the next item, Mr. Reamer already mentioned the Life Sciences and Technology Centers project. This was pending closeout, so the Fed committee did not review it. The executive on March 16th recommended an amendment to convert office space, underutilized office space at the Germantown Innovation Center into wet lab space. It has $600,000 of recordation premium tax that's being used in fiscal 21. The executive staff have noted that they have already gotten sample bids to get an idea of cost. The only note that staff has, since this project's coming in, I recommend approval, but it should go through a reconciliation process with all kind of current revenue items, given the potential tightness of the budget in both the capital and operating side in the future.
And I'll just add that while we didn't review this CIP item at committee, we did discuss this issue, and I asked the executive branch if they would, send this recommendation. So personally, I can attest to my support for it. I'm sure many council members would support it as well. All right.
All right, not hearing anything, I'll move on to Wheaton.
Please.
All right, so the Wheaton redevelopment program was scheduled to be reviewed by the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy and the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, but that ultimately needed to be deferred because of an accounting issue item that came up as described in the packet. So this has not been reviewed by either committees. As noted, the project is near completion. There's still hope to open and have offices or the departments and park and planning move in later in fiscal 21. The accounting issues related to land sale proceeds. The county acquired the 8787 Georgia Avenue from Park and Planning during this process and disposed of it. But during that disposal process, they never indicated a desire to not waive the transfer to the Housing Initiative Fund. We have not accounted for that, and that would require $4.25 million to be reduced from land sale proceeds and then backfilled with $4.25 million of general obligation bond. Council staff did indicate this options before the GO and Fed committees. All the committee members recommended the option of reducing land sale proceeds by $4.25 million so that transfer could go to the HIF and backfilling it with GO bonds.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
all right. I'm not quite sure procedurally how we proceed here, but we have an issue before us. So I think we'll just turn it back to the council president to ask people to get in line. If the council president will allow me, I'll start. I think we ought to transfer the funds to the HIF. That sounds like a smart idea for us. Additional funding for affordable housing is really crucial, and we're going to need to look to housing to help lead us out of this recession that we're clearly in. And we have a severe housing shortage in the county, and anything we can do to help nonprofits purchase market affordable housing is a smart idea to help finance new construction is going to be really helpful. All the different expenditures that we have in the Housing Initiative Fund. So I think this would be a smart addition. And I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the other chair of this item, chair of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, we did, as Jean described, we did poll all the members, and everybody is in agreement, and it is absolutely true. We do need to continue to do everything possible to bolster our ability to provide additional housing units. This is an important component of that, and it's unfortunate that this was overlooked, but I think that this is the right way to correct this particular omission, and I believe that we're all in agreement in terms of our policy goals here. Thank you.
I see the polling now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, do we need a motion for that, or is that part of is that going to be part of this straw vote today?
That would be a part of the straw vote today. So if
Okay.
council staff doesn't hear any opposition,
Right.
we will work with that.
Very good. Anything? I see no other council members that want to speak on this topic. So we're taking a straw. I guess we need a motion because there was no committee recommendations. Councilmember Reamer, would you like to make the motion?
Yes, please. So
And Councilmember Navarro, would you like to second?
Second.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. And I see everyone's hand up. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to have to go back to the consent calendar. I skipped over that. And it is only one item on the consent calendar, an amendment to the Comprehensive Water Supply and Sewerage Systems Plan. Is there a motion to approve our consent calendar?
so moved.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Hucker. The public hearing is tentatively scheduled for June 9th, 2020. All those in favor of the consent calendar, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously as well. Thank you very much. We will now go back to item number 5, which is the conservation of natural resources, agricultural land preservation. And that too is under the Fed Committee, so Councilmember Reamer. You were on mute. There we go.
Sorry, I'm going to click my links here. All right. So I guess I'll just give the highlight. You know, we are concerned about a continuing challenge with adequate resources for the agricultural preservation, functions in the county, and so we have made a recommendation that would, I think, help support additional resources for the preservation projects. So, Jean, can you walk us through the packet?
Sure. Hold on. All right. So yes, the Fed Committee did review this. And as always, there are some non-easement expenditures that have been programmed in there since about 2010. The Fed Committee requested that the executive consider moving those before the operating budget was submitted. The operating budget we received in March did not transfer that. And so there's about $213,000 a year programmed in the CIP that are for non-easement. The rest of it is used by the Office of Agriculture to purchase easements as they can. And as noted in the staff report, the agricultural transfer tax, which used to support the CIP project, has continued to dwindle just by the fact that there is very little agricultural land in the county that would meet that requirement. Given that the executive did not recommend an amendment to this, and given the Fed Committee's previous review and the council's support of a continuity of services budget in fiscal 21, staff recommends approval as the Fed Committee reviewed in February and as recommended by the executive.
Okay. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just wanted to note the letter that the committee sent over. Obviously, we were in different times when the committee sent it over, but the interest was the $213,000 that has been moved through the operating expenses that has been parked in the capital budget, which impacts the ability to buy the the easements, which is at the heart of our agricultural land preservation strategy in the county. And Mike and Jeremy in the Office of Agriculture do a terrific job and have really been at the forefront of that, working with our farm community. Obviously disappointed. I think I can understand at this point with the budget the way that it is, that it would be difficult to find that money in a very tight and very difficult operating budget. But I hope that we can put a pin in that commitment and that issue and make sure that as we come back to this next year, we really ought to do that. It really isn't something that should be in the capital budget, and it really is crowding out our sustained commitment to our agricultural preservation and to our farm community. And so I just wanted to make sure that I both thanked the Office of Agriculture, Mike and Jeremy, and the work that they do, and also note that this committee recommendation, I hope we can, as we look at a same services budget and don't make some of the changes we wanted to, I hope that this is one of the commitments that we will discuss this year, but recognize that the timing isn't right for it, but hope that we can come back to it next year and fulfill the commitment that we look to make to our agricultural community and to our farmers. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just as a note, and it was pointed out to me last night, that we're changing the way we're talking about same services budget to continuity of services, because it has caused some question about whether we're going to do everything exactly the same, and obviously we're not. So we're going to try our best to call it continuity of services rather than just same services budget. I see no other speakers. Is there anything else? Councilmember Reamer or Mr. Smith?
No, if this would be straw vote as far as the committee's recommendation, which was the executive's recommendation in January.
Very good. It is a committee recommendation, so we need no motion. All those in favor of it as a straw vote, please raise your hand. Opposed? That carries unanimously as well. Thank you very much. The next item is Parks. That also comes under Councilmember Reamer's Fed Committee. And Councilmember Reamer, did you have a comment?
Okay. Well, let's see. Let me click over here. So there's a lot going on here. We have a significant update around athletic fields, and a question now about whether we can pursue or how to pursue the continuing expansion of the renovation program for ball fields. And I think that's probably one of the larger items here, but why don't I start with Pam and we'll walk through the packet.
Please.
Hi, good morning. You're correct. We're meeting on this topic today to talk about some amendments to the CIP. Some amendments to the CIP that were sent over from the county executive with the operating budget. And the first one of those there were three amendments. The first one of those three modifies the funding or makes a recommendation for funding for ball fields for FY21 and FY22. And typically in a normal budget year, we would receive the operating budget and the amendments together, and they would be coordinated. But given the situation with reviewing the budget under COVID-19, staff is taking a different approach to the budget, as the council president has mentioned, a continuity of services approach, which may change the way the CUP budget is analyzed. So staff had put in the report to defer this decision on ball field renovation funding until the CUP review. But since this report has been posted, the council's also received a letter from the director of the Community Use of Public Facilities stating the executive's position on this, which is under the current revenue and budget situation to not recommend the funding of CUP funds for the ball fields as sent over with his amendments on March 16th. So you can have one amendment.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I thought you were going to pause to explain. So the issue is that a lot of the funding for additional expansion of the renovation program to fully renovate fields at the schools that we have not yet renovated them, that funding was going to come from CUP fund balance. And now there's a concern that with a decline of permit revenue, because all the sports events are shutting down and so forth, the revenue picture has changed dramatically for CUP. And so they're seeking to be able to hold on to their fund balance at this time, and therefore, potentially not need an infusion later on. So I think we will need to dive into that further when we take up CUP, and that's a subsequent discussion. I think we need to certainly get clear on all of those projections, and then consider whether we want to search for an alternative funding strategy for the additional fields. That certainly has always been an option. We've sought to pay for it from the CUP fund balance because we felt like that was an appropriate source of funding. However, we could also use GO bonds to fund the additional field expansions, which I think would make sense. So I think we can, again, take all that up subsequently, right, Pam?
That's correct. You can take it up as you do a deeper evaluation of the CUP operating budget. If you believe OMB and county exec that there is not the funding there, or that they don't want to engage in use of that funding with an unknown revenue stream in the months coming forward, you could decide today to choose a different funding source, given this is a CIP item and we could close it out today.
Okay, we could do that today. So we don't need to wait for if we want to accept the argument from the executive branch that fee revenue has declined and they don't want to fund this, they don't want to use this funding source, then we could switch that funding source to GO bonds.
Correct.
And what is
Actually, sorry, this is Vivian. I'm just listening in, but my understanding of the project is that the CUP funds are current revenue and they're used for planning. So I'm not sure if you can switch GO bonds for that. Pam may have better understanding of that, but I just wanted to raise that issue.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friedson, please.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to Chair Reamer and to Ms. Dunn. So I understand the county executive's perspective. I mean, this council has really committed to the ball field initiative, and that has been a core part of our last budget and was beginning to be a core part of this budget. I think it's another example of something that we need to continue to do, but have to reflect and understand the challenges that we face. And so I'm cognizant of where we are and respect the county executive's position, but I don't think it's clear of what the fund balance of CUP actually is. And I don't think that has been shared with us in a very clear way. And so if we're going to move forward with holding off on this in light of the fact that I think we can all recognize that CUP funding has been significantly diminished because of the social distancing health directives, we got to know, how much money we're talking about, what of that money is being directed to what places and what's available. And so before we make decisions, in my view, of whether we reduce that funding or find other sources of funding or decide to forego the commitment that we've already gone to delay the implementation of the ball field initiative, I really think we need some clarity from CUP on what those numbers look like. And so I just wanted to make a plug for that, and I hope that staff can get that to us, soon from the executive branch so that we can have that information to make a thoughtful recommendation based off of this.
Thank you. Mary Beck, please. Mary Beck, are you on the line?
Sorry, just trying to unmute.
Okay.
Just a couple of technical issues. As far as Vivian's concerned, I think we're okay with using GO bonds. We've used them before in this project to renovate the fields, and it's not been a problem. It's not really just planning, it's actually doing the field renovations is the way I understand it. If you are interested in delaying a decision on bonds, I would hope maybe you could try to make that by next week. I think council staff may be interested in trying to do a CIP reconciliation, at least a preliminary one, a little earlier, so they'll want to know if you want to allocate GO bonds. To Mr. Friedson's point, we do have that information available and can make it available to you in terms of where we are with fund balance. You should know that CUF is losing $1 million a month in revenues as things stand right now. And one of the projections that I looked at, if we funded the $600,000 as originally recommended, we'd end up with about $1.6 million left over in fund balance by the end of 21 if FY21 revenues stayed on track. That is a big assumption that I do not think we can make. Even if things sort of open up again, we're not really sure how people's behaviors will be changing. So I think that the executive is very supportive of doing this. He wanted to do it. But what I would recommend is maybe taking a wait and see perspective. There's no harm in coming back to this in 3 months and seeing where things are. You may lose a season. I will say that because obviously Parks has to do these renovations when school is closed. But I think you don't necessarily have to lose a full year. So I would just say that I think there is so much that is unknown, and we will make that information available.
I had a question, Mary Beth. What is the fund balance for CUF?
What is the fund balance projected? So the projected at the end of 20, I believe with the numbers that I saw, was about 3.5 million.
The end of fiscal year 20.
Right.
Actually, what's showing in the recommended budget is 5.6 million.
Yes, right, Vivian. That's not reflecting third quarterly analysis. That's what
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that's what
Gotcha.
just got sent over. And so there's obviously a lot of lost revenues. As I said, $1 million a month. Now they have some cost reductions, but not always. One of the things I found out is they are paying utilities from schools a couple years in arrears. So even though we're not using schools, we're paying utility fees to schools because of the billing cycle. So we can get into that in more depth. I don't recall when the CUF operating budget is up, but if there's something you need next week, if you want to try to consider using bonds but want to hold off now, I just think Keith would know better, but I think council staff wanted to try to get somewhat of a handle on the CIP so that it could be helpful for the operating budget reconciliation.
Ms. Beck, can you tell us when you'll actually be sharing the fund balance, not projections, but actual numbers?
Well, it's all going to be projections for the, we can do that later today.
The actual numbers you're saying?
Yeah, but it will be projections because what we need to know is where we're going to close out FY20 and where FY21 would close. And again, what we've got in our projections for 20 right now, 21, is probably not realistic, right? For the moment, our preliminary numbers still show what we submitted.
Well,
we don't know we don't know how behaviors will change. We don't know how long the shutdowns will go on.
Well, actually, we want actuals and projections, please. So
yeah.
Okay.
We'll provide that.
Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think to Ms. Beck's points, I've been participating on Zoom calls just as all of you have with different sectors that are out there, and I have participated in a couple with some of our sports associations, and the situation is dire among many of these associations. Obviously, entire seasons have been canceled, which is a huge loss of revenue, And then you couple that with many of these sports associations produce these incredible camps that are likely going to be impacted as well. That is another source of revenue. And so that is one of yet a number of sectors in our community that's being deeply impacted by this crisis. And I will say, you know, from a public health standpoint, and also just a resource for our children and youth and adults as well, it also could potentially be a huge loss. And so as we look through the lens of next year's fiscal budget, we have to take that into account, I think, because these organizations, like so many, are going to need some form of assistance. And I know that CUF does such an outstanding job providing not just facilities, but customer service and support of these organizations. And I think there's we're going to need to have a conversation about creative ways of supporting them, because it's in the county's best interest that these organizations continue to move forward for so many reasons. So I just wanted to mention that and put a plug in that we'll likely have to discuss this at a later time.
Okay. Anything else on this topic?
So I think we turn to this when we do.
I just want to, if I can, the CUP operating budget, I believe, is pretty late scheduled into the process, and I think that Ms. Beck was correct that the CIP discussions and reconciliation is going to be wrapping up before the CUP operating budget is reviewed by the council. There is some timing issue there.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Then I'd recommend, how about we could do 1 year of CUP funding and not show additional funding, I guess. This is, I mean, I think if we use the CUP reserve and CUP runs out of funding, they're going to need to come to us for funding, and we'll need to provide that. So I think it's sort of just a question, really, of do we want to continue with the expansion of, or do we want to continue with the field renovation strategy? And if so, how do we want to pay for that? So I would recommend that we continue with it, and perhaps fund it with a year from CUP and then additional funding from GO bonds, I guess.
Ms. Beck, did you want to comment on that, please? You're on mute. Mary, you're on mute. You have to take yourself off of mute.
Sorry.
Mary, no, you're back on mute again.
Oh.
There we go. Okay.
I feel like those old couples that are looking at the camera trying to figure out how to make it work.
You all feel that way, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't feel.
Yeah, I still think that we would be very short after the 1 year. And I would say if this is a very strong commitment you want to make, I would encourage you to make it with GO bonds. We don't have a history of using general fund money to support CUF. That's not how CUF is supposed to be self-supporting. So that would not generally, I don't know if that's allowable. I don't know, maybe it would be, but it's supposed to be an enterprise fund and self-supporting. I had not thought at all about the point Councilmember Albornoz made, where some of these groups may also be needing assistance, and maybe reduced CUF fees or something would be one way to do it.
That argues in favor of not funding additional fields with the CUP fund balance, because we may need that fund balance for other expenditures, such as reducing fees or providing waivers or things like that.
When we know where we are. Yeah.
Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mary, and everybody, and Pam. You may have said this. Apologies if I missed this, but can you just comment on what are the costs of holding off and deferring the renovations? I mean, I know under normal circumstances, construction gets more expensive the farther off into the future you put it. That may not be the case right now. I would not prefer to delay these projects. We have many, many worthy projects and a lot of unmet need that's been, in a backlog for a long time. But are these projects going to be more expensive a year from now if we don't take action in this budget?
I know that there is some park staff also on the call. They could talk to the change in cost related to waiting year. But the one thing I'll mention is when the committee did review this back in December and had a conversation with the park staff about these fields and the evaluation they did. One, they did an evaluation to try to expedite the remaining fields. There aren't that many left, and try to do it in a 4-year period. It is also the fact that most of these fields are on the east side of the county and are in schools that have been waiting a long time to have fields that are of high quality. So if there is a possibility to not delay them, it seems like for this community, it would still be a benefit that they get a better quality field if possible.
That's exactly right. As I said, I would hope we don't have to delay. I don't want to be unfair to the argument, but I think there may be costs if we delay. There often are, and we know this project works. They're very, very popular and successful. And you're right in your wheelhouse with parks making these renovations, and they've been wildly successful and popular. So, I really think we should try to avoid delaying if we can do it.
So the way to avoid delay is to fund it with GO bond revenues.
Right.
That's the most secure way to fund it.
Mm-hmm.
The second most secure funding would be to use CUP and then kick the can down the road on CUP's balance and figure out that issue in due time. I think those are really our options. I think we're going to have to throw a lot of conventions out the window in the next year or two. Perhaps a temporary subsidy to CUP is one of those. So I guess that's the question for my colleagues. If folks want to comment on the relative measure of funding this from CUP versus GO bonds, I'm comfortable with funding it from GO bonds. I think it's just a clean way to get the issue hopefully resolved, assuming that it'll get through reconciliation. I mean, that's another question. So if reconciliation identifies that there's just no way to do it, then perhaps we could come back to the CUP question. But I think at least we could start with having the funding in there as GO bonds and see if it fits in the reconciliation. Okay.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I was concerned about the GO. I mean, I think this is going to be an incredibly difficult capital budget with a number of priorities, and so that does concern me a bit. And just to the point, I recognize that CUP is certainly losing a lot of money right now, just like any fee-for-service type of enterprise would be. But there's a difference between self-supporting and hoarding, and we want to figure out and make sure that the funds that are being collected are being used for the purposes that they're intended, which is to support the activities that we want to provide at a rate that is affordable and accessible for as many people as possible. And there are a number of equity and access issues related to this funding, which we've discussed at length. And so, I'd be a little bit concerned of trying to put it on reconciliation and putting all of our eggs in that basket and then having it get crowded out in a very difficult challenge with all the other school and transportation priorities and other issues that we have without having the detail. To Council President Katz, I really do think we need not just projections but actuals of how much money is in there, what the losses have been over the last month, and we can come to our own conclusions. We are the budget authority on the county council. This is our decision to make from a budget perspective, and currently we don't have sufficient information, and frankly we should have had it for this meeting, but since it hasn't been provided to us by the executive branch, I appreciate and respect providing it as soon as possible, but I think we ought to have that information to make the decision so we know what we're talking about. And right now we have projections that may or may not be accurate.
Well, first off, I think I think that we should hold off, and we're saying next week once we can get this information. I believe that's the best path forward. We will know in a week, or certainly know more in a week than what we know now. And there is some question because of this budget, how much of a reconciliation, if we're going to have a reconciliation list. So we haven't made that determination at this point. I think so we have to, I believe what we should do is get the information and then next week discuss this, whether or not how we should go forward.
I believe this is capital budget, though. It's not. It would be the CIP reconciliation, not the operating budget reconciliation. So, again, I think we could designate the source as GO bonds now. Perhaps we'll know as soon as a week from now whether that seems possible. And if it's not seeming possible, then we can, by that time, have the CUP have more information from CUP. I don't know that CUP is going to really, honestly, be able to give us reliable projections of their revenue because nobody knows when social distancing will, be lifted. And for example, a lot of the money comes from the Silver Spring Civic Center. How long before we start to have meetings and events there again? Mm-hmm. Anybody knows. This, it'll be hard for us to know anything about what the future revenue source is. Again, I think if we want to proceed, the most reliable way to do that is to try for GO bond revenue. So I would make a motion that we do that, and then understanding that if it can't fit, then it can't fit, and we'll seek an alternative. And if we can't find an alternative, then these fields will have to wait for renovation, it's not what we want.
Second.
Who made the second? It's been moved and seconded. There again, I believe that we should wait till next week until we actually get this information. I believe we would be much better off. So I'm not saying I'm not in favor of doing this, but I am going to vote against this motion because I believe that we should wait. And Councilmember Rice, did you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. I do. I really think we need to wait. Look, when we're talking about CUP, we're not only talking about ball fields, but we're also talking about what happens with schools. We're still not sure what's happening with our facilities. So from that perspective, especially when we're talking about future projections, things like that, I have a conference call with the superintendent later on this afternoon/evening. And so I will actually bring this up with him and just ask them their thoughts as well. When it comes to this, I'd like to get a little bit more information before we make any decisions about CUP as a whole moving forward, in light of some of the aspects that tie into our schools as well, and what could likely happen with our schools and decisions that could be made regarding our schools, which some of our ball fields are co-located next to, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot more information as well as the financial information as well. So I'm not objecting to that being a final thought, maybe next week. That still gives us time. Let's just not do it right now when we don't have all the information we need. So that's just my thought.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's any rush for us to make a decision right now without the full picture. And as it has been illustrated and articulated, if we, realize that we need to do GO bonds, we can make that decision. But I think we should first have the information from CUP and then see how we can proceed. I mean, I don't feel comfortable, and I don't know why we would make a decision that then we have to come back to next week and perhaps revisit. Why don't we just wait and then take it up?
Any other comments?
Sorry, I'm not able to hear enough. Okay, so my understanding was that council staff will be doing a draft reconciliation next week. And so if we want them to try to reconcile it with this in there, we would need to make this recommendation for them to do that. If we hold off until next week, then they will not be reconciling the CIP with this as GO bonds as a source of revenue. That's what I understood Pam to say. Pam, is that, or maybe Pete?
This is Marlene.
Different approaches here. I just wanted to say that was my understanding of what was explained to us.
Yeah, this is Marlene. If I could just chime in on the CIP reconciliation. We're hoping to do that the first week in May, or start that then. So if you can make a decision next week, by the 30th, that will be in time to be considered as part of reconciliation.
That's fine. Thank you. So I'll withdraw the motion I think I need a second to withdraw the motion. All right.
No, I think you got it. So, and Mary Beck wanted to comment as well, please.
I was just going to say what Marlene was saying was that the first week in May was my understanding for that effort. But also that as you're thinking this through, we would be taking on some additional operating costs to then maintain these fields. But waiting till next week is fine.
Thank you. And I think since we have no motion, we will be waiting until next week. Very good.
All right. So back to the packet.
Yeah.
All right. So again, we've already taken up the capital budget for parks in a very significant way. This is just following up on a couple of items. So the main one we've discussed now. There is some additional information shared about Parks has worked with the county, I guess, is it council staff or with the OMB, I'm not sure, but to identify some current revenue reductions to help with reconciliation, to help protect some of the council's key priorities in the recommended CIP that we approved previously. And then there's some water quality protection updates. So Pam, could you walk us through that, please?
Yes, so the second amendment that was forwarded by the county exec does provide some funding from current revenue in the Water Quality Protection Fund. This is to replace or shift money away from a long-term funding source that currently funds these water quality projects or the stream protection project. But the county's been having, and Park and Planning have been having some delay in getting the state funding confirmed. So this just shifts the funding source to provide water quality protection project money from long-term funding through the state, which we think we will get eventually, to the current revenue water quality protection fund. And staff conferred with Mr. Lubchenco, who also supports this. So this, in my view, is not controversial and should be supported.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to staff and to Parks for their work in figuring out how to work through the recommendation that the Fed Committee made, in particular the hard surface trails, natural surface trails, and Vision Zero commitment. They're modest improvements, but reset the baseline to an area of effort that reflects this council's commitment. And I think as we talk about going through this COVID emergency, we have to recognize the value that our trail network, over 250 miles of trails, and the 422 parks are having. The usage of those parks and trails are up in a massive way, over 40% higher usage based on initial numbers on our popular trails like Capitol Crescent Trail, over 40% higher usage of our parks based on early data that we have from COVID. This is a critical part not only for exercise and physical health, but also for mental health and well-being. I think that yesterday was Earth Day, and I think it really reflected the tremendous environmental and natural assets that we have in Montgomery County. I think that the core of that is in our park system and in our trail network, and I think this is a modest commitment. There was some creativity and a significant effort in order to put it forward. Really proud of the recommendation that the committee put forward, and appreciative of the work that staff did behind the scenes to make sure that it's plausible. And even though we are in a challenging environment, I feel very strongly that we need to move this forward, and that it is not just a commitment for the future. It is a demonstration of the importance that these critical assets in our community have for the community to get through this COVID emergency.
Thank you.
I'll just note that one of the park amenities that is most heavily used right now is trails, and one of the signature recommendations from the committee was to expand funding for trails, both paved and natural surface. So just a small example of a whole set of recommendations that I think were really important and would be protected further by the changes that Parks has been offering to save funding so that those projects can be funded. Okay, can we continue, Pam? Oh, sorry, Mr. President, was there other comments? Or? No, okay.
Okay, right, so the second amendment from the county exec that we just covered were the water quality projects. The third does talk about a further reduction in current revenue of $485,000, and what you do have in the staff report is Parks' proposed way to accommodate that reduction, and it does take a tiny bit from several capital projects, therefore not having a major impact on any one capital project. And staff supports Parks' proposed way to meet this reduction. The next thing that is in the staff report to cover, if everyone's fine with those minor reductions, is to provide appropriation for state bond bills. The commission was fortunate to receive $1.05 million in state aid for a variety of capital projects related to our neighborhood parks, and for those are listed in the packet on the third page. And we just need to have appropriation available to be able to spend the bond bills when they come in.
That's the funding source is the state bond bill, so this is not additional county funds.
Not county money.
Great to see all this additional funding coming. I know Casey Anderson and the Parks Department real priority to try to work with state elected officials to get additional support into the parks with these bond bills. So it's nice to see success with that.
Yes. If there's no questions on the next item in the report are contributions. The commission has received a contribution for the from Congressional Country Club. It's for a final forest conservation plan approval, and they need appropriation to spend those contributions. Part of it would be spent on stream protection and part of it for natural surface trails.
Okay. Straightforward.
There's just a comment in the staff report about program open space. The state had mentioned a potential allocation of money to Montgomery County for program open space, but that has not been finalized. Given the current budget situation, we're not really sure whether that will come through. And so it's just something to note, and we, as a county, get the information from the state on program open space. If it does provide more funding, and it's money that the Parks Department will want to access, then they'll need to come back for an appropriation for that contribution from the state. So that's just sort of a heads up, but we don't have a request at this time because we don't know the amount. Hasn't been finalized. That's the third major thing to cover today are some technical adjustments. The one that is not just a minor correction to some tables, which is sort of the other piece that has come through OMB and Parks in reconciling the project description forms, but the other one has to do with the Trails Natural Surface and Resource-Based Recreation Project. When you reviewed this as a council, there was discussion about increased funding for this, which was approved by straw vote. What wasn't discussed at the time was the source of funding for this. And typically natural surface trail work is done through current revenue because they are not long-term capital infrastructure, although the bridges related to the natural surface trails are long-term infrastructure. And so in consultation with Parks has evaluated the additional funding per fiscal year and can confirm that they can spend all the additional funding on the major renovation or the replacement of bridges for our natural surface trails. So I'm suggesting that rather than designating the additional $800,000 over the capital budget for the next 6 years, it as GEO bond funding.
Okay, so to be clear, the idea here is you're trying to save current revenue. Is that right?
Correct.
So is current revenue I believe there's an effort underway to try to eliminate or reduce current revenue as much as possible, saving funding for the operating budget. So you've identified that these expenditures can be met through the bridge renovation projects and then funded with GO bonds rather than current revenue, which allows us to meet both objectives at the same time.
Correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the state bond bill and acknowledge the work that Senator Zucker has put into place, especially with the Olney Family Neighborhood Park. It's great because I think that, you know, a lot of times we focus on very large parks or trails, and we know that these types of amenities in our neighborhoods are so important. So I just really appreciate working in collaboration with Senator Zucker and supporting this.
Thank you. Pam, if you could please continue.
So do we need a motion, though? I think we may. I mean, we can move all the staff recommendations together, or alternatively, I just want to make sure we didn't move past any of these recommendations without a motion if that's needed. Pam?
Right. So actually, I think there is sort of a motion for all of the amendments. I know that you're holding off on the ball fields, but it would be a motion to straw vote approve the water quality project, the current revenue slight reduction taken across the different projects, the appropriation for the state bond bills, the appropriation for contributions, this technical adjustment to the funding source for trails, and then the minor adjustments that are listed on the 4th page of the staff report.
But that would be for the entirety, not and for any specific, right? Is that what you're suggesting? You're saying
I'm moving all the staff changes to the committee report. I'll move for approval all the staff changes to the committee report.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councilmember Friedson. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Jawando. I see no comments. Let me double check that.
Just to clarify, all the staff minus the ball fields.
Right.
Yeah. As noted. She noted that. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Okay. All those, I see no other comments. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we are actually early, not surprising because we had so many deferrals. So we're going to recess to come back at 11:30 to sit as the Board of Health, where we're going to receive the update on COVID-19 and county public health planning. So we are recessed now until 11:30. Thank you very much.